What is up, everybody? Happy Halloween and welcome to the Blogger Bowl Week 9 recap show. Was confused there for a second.
I go back and forth too.
Thank you for dressing up, Matt. Appreciate you dressing up for the holiday.
I'm dressed up as Maction, Dan. It's the debut
I
of
love it.
Maction. I'm dressed up as Maction. I'm wearing
Maction.
an Ohio Bobcat shirt. I know they don't play this round, which I think is dumb. I think at this point of the year, Maction should just be like the MAC plays on Tuesdays and Wednesdays. They don't even play on Saturdays. I just think everybody should play on Tuesdays and Wednesdays. That's neither here nor there. I know Ohio doesn't play tonight or tomorrow, but to me, they're my Maction team. They're who I root for on Tuesdays and Wednesdays. So I'm supporting the team. I'm supporting the conference that I love, Dan. I love it.
When we get to the odds, I do have the odds written down for all 4 Maction games, including the sickos game of the year in college football. We'll talk about that in a bit.
I'm sticking to the system, which I'll also get to in a bit. That's worked for the last year and a half.
The system's going to be dicey this year. We'll see for some of these games.
Dan, it should be dicey every year, but it hasn't been.
That's a good point. I do want to talk about, so if you follow me on Twitter, I've been talking about how this past weekend in college football was a clip show. I'll get to that in a second, but I just like Twitter is a buzz right now because there's more new Connor Stallion stuff. The new thing is that he apparently was at the Central Michigan. He obtained a field pass for the Central Michigan State season opener, was on the Central Michigan sidelines in Michigan or in Central Michigan coach's gear, polo, hat, just hanging out on the sidelines at Central Michigan, looking like Bobby Valentine in the dugout when he got ejected and put on the Groucho Marx.
It's good comp. Good comp.
This just continues to be the gift that keeps on giving this story. Anyway,
again, I'm hurt. I'm saddened. I think this has spoiled possibly college football for me forever outside of Maction. I just cannot believe the good, honest, historically successful, leaders of the West, the Michigan Wolverines, would do something like this. I cannot believe it. It's sad, disappointing. All those words wrapped. I can't even talk about how sad it makes me that they've ruined college football for all of us. With the exception of the MAC. The MAC is still pure.
The MAC is back because the MAC never left, baby. Yeah. Look, we love college football around here, and we can be honest about the sport of college football.
That's what I was just being about Michigan. I'm very honest.
This past week was not one of the better weeks of college football we've ever seen. In fact, we can be honest, it kind of stunk. There were a few interesting results, but by and large, it wasn't the most compelling week. But what was weird about it was that it kind of felt like a clip show in college football. What do I mean by that? Well, Georgia had an extra gear when they were challenged. Kyle McCord might not be very good, but he has Marvin Harrison Jr. Penn State's offense is kind of butt. Not sure if Oklahoma was as good as their record. Alex Grinch's defense was embarrassing. North Carolina's defense was embarrassing. College football might have passed Dabo Swinney by. Pat Narduzzi said something stupid, and Shedeur Sanders got hit a lot. So there were a lot of things this past weekend in college football that looked pretty familiar to things we've seen so far this season and in the past couple of years, except, Matt, there was one thing that was a new development in the big picture of college football. Oregon 35.
I was going to say, was it Oregon getting stomped or Utah getting stomped at home?
Oregon is a legit national title contender, and Bo Nix is a legit Heisman contender. There could have been 400,000 people in Rice-Eccles Stadium, and it would not have mattered. The defense and crowd were always going to have to keep Utah going here, and it just didn't happen. Bo Nix systematically picked them apart. I didn't love how Utah continuously left the middle of the field open. We know Bo Nix doesn't air it out a ton, but again, I'm not sure how many scenarios exist where Utah would have been competitive. Nix's ADOT was a modest 7.1. He had no big-time throws, but no turnover-worthy plays. I talked about death by 1,000 cuts offense for Oregon. They had a 53% success rate and just 2 explosive plays. They just churn you to death. They ran for 5.3 yards per clip, and there was a fumble in there too. How big of an ass-kicking was this, Matt? You know I love nerd stats. Parker Fleming, Stats of War on Twitter. He does a graphic every week called Did We Really Get Beat That Bad?, which measures the net success rate of every FBS game. The only team with a bigger positive net success rate this weekend was Boise State against Wyoming. That means by this one metric, Matt, Oregon beat Utah worse than Notre Dame beat Louisville, worse than SMU beat Tulsa. Just utter decimation. Utah's offense has done nothing burger against good teams without Cam Rising, but I will always love Bryson Barnes, if nothing else for the graphic Fox had during the game that said, quote, grew up raising approximately 12,000 pigs, most in FBS, end quote. I do want to talk about a big picture thing in a minute, but Matt, what were your thoughts on what you saw in the utter decimation of the Utah Utes at home at the hands of the Oregon Ducks?
I think it says a lot more about Oregon than it says about Utah. I think going into this year, Utah, especially without Cam Rising, Utah's kind of been what we've expected them to be, which is a frisky team, but one that, for as good as of a coach as Kyle Whittingham is, it's not necessarily a program that's built to survive significant losses. And they lost a good amount of talent from last year. And then, oh, by the way, their best player, their quarterback, has not played yet this year because he hasn't been healthy with a knee.
And
the depth just, yeah, is not going to play this year. The depth just isn't there for the Utah program, and that's kind of okay. Like, that's who Utah is. This is a tough loss for them, but they just played a really good team on a mission, and they kind of were in the way. And I did say last week that I was a little bit worried that this wasn't a night game for Utah. Not that they would have won a night game, but might not have been 35-6. I think Utah in the long term, for at least for as long as Kyle Whittingham is there, I know he's getting up there in age. Like, they're going to be fine. This is just, they're going to have a good year, then they're going to have an okay year, then a good year. Then that's just kind of what they're going to do. Yeah, for Oregon, that was so impressive to go in there against. And now again, third string quarterback for Utah, but a football team that is really confident, believing in themselves, just came back on the road against USC. That I know not a good defense, but scored 30 plus points in a rivalry game on the road and a comeback win. They're believing, their fans were believing. Kyle Witt, great head coach who has that team believing, and Oregon just comes in there and rips it all away from pretty much the jump. It was an incredibly impressive performance, talent wise, but also just attitude wise, that we really haven't seen from this Oregon team very often in years past. And I think it's something that Dan Lanning is starting to change in that program culture wise. There hasn't really been that Oregon moment, similar to Clemsoning. I feel like Oregon would a lot of times under, whether it's Mark Helfrich or Mario Cristobal, I feel like Oregon would Clemson sometimes. Now I get they lost to Washington last year, but Bo Nix was hurt in that game, and that was a really tough back and forth game they lost. There haven't been these weeks where they just kind of don't show up. And they're starting to play their best football as the season goes on. They're getting better as the season goes on. And I think that's a testament, not only the talent they have, but how good of a football coach Dan Lanning is there.
So I want to talk about the big picture here. It really feels like Washington has been trending down since they won that Oregon game. Michael Penix Jr. got banged up, got hit a lot in that Oregon game, and hasn't looked fully right. The next two games at USC and at home against Utah seem less daunting than we thought before the season, but they struggled with Arizona State and Stanford, so who's to say they won't struggle in those games? If they win those, they go to Corvallis. I know Oregon State just lost to Arizona, but with
still
the Civil
a good football
War
team.
But with the Civil War in Eugene this year, that could be the stand-in for pissed-off Oregon State fans, mad about the dissolution of the Pac-12. Corvallis, a tough place to play. So to me, it feels like Oregon has an inside track on the playoff if they went out, and I think they'd beat Washington in a rematch. And I'm going to put this out there right now, Matt. There isn't a game in college football I want to see more than Georgia versus Oregon right now. Oregon got embarrassed by Georgia last year, but I don't think we'll see the same thing in game 27 of the Lanning Nix era as we did in game 1 in Atlanta. It would be Bo Nix's 5th game against Georgia. This Oregon team is humming. Georgia is the end-all, be-all, the team to beat in college football. We know that, but I want to see it. I think that Oregon-Georgia is a fascinating potential matchup. We kind of know what Georgia-Michigan would look like. Florida State, maybe Keon Coleman and Johnny Wilson have the dudes on the outside that can give Georgia some trouble. But just the efficiency and the way that Dan Lanning knows that Georgia program, I want to see that. And I just want to see how different of a game it is now, 2 years later, than it was the first time they played.
Yeah, and I mean, we can use this to transition into Georgia talk, because that was probably the other moment that stuck out to me over the weekend. But I think that's a good point. And I think Georgia has kind of reestablished themselves as, oh yeah, okay, they're still king until somebody knocks them off. But I don't think, and I don't care if this makes me sound like a Michigan hater, but I don't think there's a team right now in the country I'm more impressed with after Georgia than Oregon. I know Florida State's had some nice wins, but they haven't been super dominant. And they needed to come back at home against Duke, a Duke team that just got shut out by Louisville. They, Clemson was playing much better football at the beginning of the year, but this is a 4-4 Clemson team that they needed overtime to go ahead and beat. I'm not saying they're not a very good football team. I'm not saying they're not very dangerous, but like it seems like Florida State played their best football in week 1 and has been good, not great since then. Whereas it seems like Oregon is a team that it's a snowball effect. Like they started rolling and now they're starting to pick up steam and they look really, really good. And I think after Georgia, Oregon is playing probably the best football of anybody right now because it's just impossible to evaluate Michigan. I know Michigan's undefeated, and I know they've steamrolled just about every team they've played, even though Bowling Green and Rutgers were in one-score games in the third quarter. Like they've steamrolled just about everybody they've played, but like I mean, UNLV's 6-1, I think, and if you want to call them a good team, that's fine. But their strength of schedule is 111th in the country. Their Big Ten schedule has been brutal. Their non-conference schedule was brutal. Like we don't know who they are yet. So for me, Oregon is the second most impressive team in the country right now.
I'm not gonna disagree with that assessment. I think that's very fair.
I'll eat my own. If Michigan goes on the road and beats Penn State, handedly and looks good doing it, and then goes and beats Ohio State 3 weeks later, whatever it is, I will absolutely put my hand up and say Michigan is the second or probably the second best team in the country if Georgia's still undefeated at that point, which their schedule got tricky, but just right now I can't do it.
I mean, if you want to say Michigan's better than Oregon, I don't have a problem with that.
No,
I just see them play a competitive.
I'm not necessarily going to say you're wrong either.
Right.
Like you might be right. I just don't think we know that, and I think we know what Oregon's resume is, whereas Michigan, like it or not, has a 2 to 2.5 week resume this year. They have Penn State, they have Ohio State, and maybe a Big Ten championship game, but probably
they have Penn State on the road, and they have Ohio State.
Yeah,
that's it. They're not. I don't care who wins the West.
Very unlikely that's a game, but
I don't think lame duck Brian Ferentz is going to cook something up to beat Michigan. Although, if I remember,
is Wisconsin now in the driver's seat for that?
I don't know. There's like 3 teams. There's like 4 teams. Like Nebraska controls their own destiny.
Oh God,
it's going to be ugly. What also
Northwestern not dead.
Jesus. The most impressive team in the country, or at least the number 1 team in the country, they might not be tonight. We'll find out I don't even want to talk about the playoff rankings. I don't care.
They should be. Well, we're gonna on Thursday, but they should be the number 1 team in the country.
Georgia 43, Florida 20. Matt, here's a sequence in the first half. Hilariously bad 4th and 1 play at their own 34. Touchdown, fumble, touchdown, block, punt, safety. That's how Florida went from down 10-7 to down 26-7. I'm not sure at which point Carson Beck killed a man with a trident, but that escalated quickly for the Gators. The trick play was always one of those things where you look brilliant if it works and look like buffoons if it doesn't. My only gripe with it is that Florida was running the ball really well early in that game, and it was less than a yard. I'm not sure why you don't just run a normal play, but I don't hate going for it. Florida was always going to have to create variance to win, so it is what it is. Florida was likely never going to win this game. Georgia had a 55% success rate, had about half a point of EPA on every pass play, and averaged 11.25 yards per drop back. We'll see if he's as cool under pressure the way Stetson Bennett was, but Carson Beck's ceiling is undeniably higher, and the offense hasn't even reached its full peak. Ladd McConkey looks fully healthy finally, and Brock Bowers will be back eventually. We talk about it all the time with Georgia. It seems like anytime anybody wants to even throw the slightest modicum of doubt, Georgia has a game where it's like, fellas, we're the guys to beat. And they just handled their business in a game that Florida had a great scripted drive to start the game. And then after that, it was all Bulldogs.
Yeah, it was. They lose Brock Bowers and Ladd McConkey comes back. And Ladd McConkey is not as good as Brock Bowers, but Ladd McConkey is a very good college football player. Yeah. And it was like, all right, we're still deep. We still have, somebody really good to come and fill in and be a weapon for Carson Beck. And they're just they're a factory. They're the opposite of what we were talking about with Utah. It doesn't matter how many people get injured. They have 2-3 deep behind that are good enough to be starters on any most top 25 teams in the country. And it's impossible to not be impressed with Carson Beck. And I'm looking back on their schedule last year, they kind of started, and not quite as slow as they started out this year, but Kent State was a weird game at home. Yeah. They barely snuck by Mizzou. The Florida game they won, but wasn't all that impressive. Then, once we kind of got to later on in the year, they started similar to what we said with Oregon. The snowball got rolling, and they became also almost impossible to stop. And while I don't think this team is as talented as the one last year, because I think last year's team was just insanely talented, I still think they're the most talented team in the country. And Kirby Smart, as we saw last year when he tried to convince his team that people were suggesting they were a 7-win team, can clearly get his guys believing and buying into whatever his message is. And the message is working. Not necessarily sure what it is exactly, but I'm sure it's one of everybody doubts you. Everybody thinks you're not good. Everybody thinks Michigan's better than you, whatever. The message is working. The Dogs are playing some of their best football. Carson Beck is getting comfortable. Like, that was a big game, a big spot, an emotional game for him. Like, he grew up a Florida fan, like Florida kid, all that. Like, that was could have been a big distraction spot for him in his first start. Didn't matter at all. He was absolutely perfect. I think they're going to get. I tend to believe Brock Bowers is going to be back for the postseason. If he doesn't want to, like, that's fine. But seems like the kind of kid and program that's going to bring him back. They're just playing such good football, and it feels like Georgia's kind of Georgia again. This is going to be a tough test with Mizzou, but like, they got Mizzou at home, and quite honestly, after last year, like last year's close loss or close win that they probably should have actually lost at Mizzou, is enough for Kirby Smart to like be a college football coach this week and say like, oh, you guys think you're the shit because you beat the hell out of Florida. Well, Mizzou almost beat you last year, so what do you, like, use that as motivation, not get them too distracted. And I think this week's a motivational game for them.
Oh, for sure. And last year it was they were coasting, and then Tennessee came in with all that hype, came to Athens, number one in the country.
And the playoffs. I know the final was 27-13, but it was never that.
I mean, close. Georgia could have named. Georgia was up 1,000,000 points, and then it started raining, and Kirby took his foot off the gas. There was no doubt who was better, and Georgia took that game personally. I don't think there's that kind of game on the schedule this year. The SEC is just not that strong this year, top to bottom, once you get past Georgia. But like you said, the Missouri game's interesting. They still do have to go to Knoxville, so there's enough in front of them. There's also a very interesting game with Georgia Tech. I want to talk about that coming up in a little bit. But Georgia's Georgia. They're going to be there all year long, you know it, and we'll see what happens there. The big upset of the week, I've just got a bunch of other things that I want to kind of talk about, and you can piggyback on any of this. Kansas 38, Oklahoma 33. As a Texas fan, it's really annoying how that was the outlier performance by Oklahoma. They weren't super convincing against any decent competition before the Texas game, and they haven't been since. It's almost bizarre to think this, but Kansas was more physical than Oklahoma. Kansas ran for 225 yards, and the crazy thing is they won without even playing like super sharp at times. Jason Bean made a ton of bad mistakes. There were some dropped passes, and they still won. The big picture, though, you can never say never in college football, but it really seems like the Big 12 will need some help to get itself into the playoffs. It has to be one-loss Oklahoma versus one-loss Texas in the Big 12 title game for them to have a realistic shot to get the 4 seed. If either one of those teams lose again before then, which feels very possible, particularly with Texas, and I'll talk about that on Thursday, they're going to be left out. So that's a bad loss for the Big 12 at large. But I'm sure the people in the Big 12 are very thrilled that Kansas, their first win over Oklahoma since 1997.
I think you're right. I think both, you probably need those teams to run the table, but I weirdly think like if Oklahoma doesn't and Texas still wins the Big 12 as a one-loss Texas team, which their schedule's tricky going forward, not to say that they will, that while they might not fully control their destiny, I feel like they would still have a pretty decent chance to play off, especially if Alabama keeps big weekend for that too. If Alabama wins this weekend and like keeps looking good, gets himself to a conference title game, like that could end up being the best non-conference win of the season for any team. So I like that's going to go a long way for them. And I think like if the committee sees a loss in a rivalry game to a ranked Oklahoma team in a weird split, I don't think they'll get super penalized. But that like you said, if they don't both run the table and Oklahoma or Texas doesn't win that game, or probably Oklahoma too, they're going to need some help to get into the playoff.
I don't disagree with that. NC State 24, Clemson 17. Not talking about what's wrong with Clemson. We've done it. Nothing has changed. I didn't listen to it because I hate listening to Davos Swin.
I just read the quotes. I didn't really listen to the whole thing. But the quotes were hilarious.
2 times 0 equals 0 in that case. But I only bring it up to say this: is Clemson going to miss a bowl game? They're 4-4, which means obviously
they're going to go 6-6.
They have to go 2-2 down the stretch to make a bowl game. But the schedule the rest of the season, Matt: home versus Notre Dame, home versus Georgia Tech, home versus North Carolina, and at South Carolina.
I think they'll find a way to go 6-6.
They could pull some of that little Clemson magic in any of the home games, and I get it. South Carolina has largely been deep fried ass this season, but Notre Dame and North Carolina are, I was going to say, appreciably better. I'll come back to that in a second too. And South Carolina beat them at Clemson last year, so nothing is guaranteed. But Clemson missing a bowl game would be absolutely hilarious. And shout out to Dave Doran for picking a fight. Like, of all of the people I don't think you want to pick a fight with, Steve Smith Sr.
Is not the guy. Like Ryan Day
Fair,
went after Lou
but
Holtz. Like, okay, he's a little old guy who won't do anything. Steve Smith will actually like
Lou
do
Holtz,
something.
Lou Holtz would fight dirty as hell, and you know that. Lou Holtz is not above fighting kneecaps.
In his prime.
Now, you don't think that like 90-year-old Lou Holtz doesn't?
No, I don't think he'd be let. Like, nobody would let him. Somebody would hold him back.
That's fair. Yeah, I'm not sure, but like, but to Dave Doran's credit, like, talk your shit, man. That was amazing. Just doing this again so I can continue to be the person in the media who was first on this. Marvin Harrison Jr. should win the Heisman Trophy. Just a casual 6-catch, 123-yard, 2-touchdown performance against Wisconsin at Camp Randall. No idea if Kyle McCord is any good, but he's clearly a step down from what Ohio State is used to having a quarterback. And yet, Harrison is 6th in the country in receiving yards, and of the 47 receivers in college football who have at least 40 catches, he has the highest yards per catch average at 18.5. All that to say, the counting stats are starting to match what the eye test is showing you. He is the best player in college football. I know it's hard for non-quarterbacks to get Heisman votes ever, really, in this day and age. He probably needs some losses from some Pac-12 contenders, and of course, they have to beat Michigan, but they can beat Michigan, and it's starting to feel like they're going to need a big play or two from him to do so. If all that happens, give him the damn trophy.
If Ohio State runs the table and Marvin Harrison has, 2 touchdowns, 150 yards, and 10 receptions against Michigan, I think he's a Heisman front runner. Like, Michael Penix Jr. is the odds-on favorite right now, and I guess like he still can, and he's going to have to one, get healthy, because it does seem like he's banged up. Washington's going to have to start playing better football. Bo Nix is another guy who I can see if Oregon runs the table and looks really good doing it. But like, if Ohio State's undefeated, the narrative is starting to grow with Marvin Harrison Jr., and that's more important than honestly anything in the Heisman race, is that those whispers, that buzz needs to start to form. And it's finally starting to form, like you said, around Marvin Harrison Jr. So in my opinion, your opinion too, he's the best college football player. He's playing the best football of anyone in college football right now. It's okay. Just give him the award. He's the best.
I agree. I was talking about this. I got to bring up the list of guys so I don't forget them. And the Slack, the Discord that I'm in. Where is it? Okay. Sorry. If I forget someone, I forget someone. But to me, it kind of feels like, and I don't think JJ McCarthy is going to win the Heisman, but bear with me. I think JJ McCarthy, Bo Nix, Jordan Travis, and Marvin Harrison Jr. all have to win out to have a chance to win the Heisman. I think Penix can throw for like 500 yards, like a huge game, and a loss in Corvallis, and have a chance.
Yeah.
But so there's a lot of guys who have to win out, and I just wonder how all that is going to be affected down the stretch. The last game I want to talk about before we move on to lines for next week is Georgia Tech 46, North Carolina 42. So when I wrote my notes and said that UNC was appreciably better than Clemson, I read that as North Carolina 46, Georgia Tech 42. And then I looked at it again and I was like, wait,
no,
they lost? So I don't even want to talk about Gene Chiswick's defense giving up 246 rushing yards in the fourth quarter alone. I want to talk about Georgia Tech. Georgia Tech's last 4 games, Matt, were 11-point loss at home to Bowling.
They're drunk.
Win against Miami, 15-point loss at home to Boston College, and a win against North Carolina. They are 4-4 and have alternated losses and wins the entire season, meaning they have not won 2 games in a row. They have not lost 2 games in a row. Their last 4 games at Virginia, at Clemson, versus Syracuse, versus Georgia. It would be the funniest season in college football history if Georgia Tech goes 6-6 by alternating losses and wins the entire season and beats Miami, North Carolina, Clemson, and Georgia, but loses to Bowling Green, Boston College, Virginia, and Syracuse.
Would be hilarious. They're not beating Georgia, but the other 3 are very possible.
And it's, look, I understand losing all 4 is more likely than them beating Georgia, but like, I just like, that's absolutely hysterical. Is there anything else from this week in college football that was on your mind that you watched, that you saw, that you wanted to talk about? Okay, here you go. Here's one for you.
Okay.
So Iowa announced that Brian Ferentz is not going to return. Which
I like that they did it early. Like, they started it early. They're ripping off the Band-Aid now, and
we are done with this.
They're giving him a send off too. They're giving him a nice send off.
So, and I appreciate the new athletic director. Gary Bartra was the one who fucked this whole thing up from Jump Street. Like, I was doing some reading about this. Like, Gary Bartra was technically his boss because Kirk Ferentz wanted to hire Brian, but they couldn't because of nepotism.
Okay, yeah.
So the nepotism law in Iowa, so they kind of skirted it by making him report directly to Gary Bartra. And finally, the new AD is like, fuck this, we're done with this.
No, we're not doing
But I will say this. So what is like the running joke? Like where the running joke in college football is disgraced or embarrassing coaches who get fired end up going where, Matt?
Alabama.
They go to Nick Saban's School for Wayward Boys. To his credit, before his dad gave him a promotion that he didn't deserve, he was a pretty decent to good offensive line coach at Iowa. Like that the Iowa offensive line won the Joe Moore Award in 2016. It would be kind of interesting if he ends up going to Alabama and to Nick Saban's School for Wayward Boys and helps out with that offensive line that's been really bad at Alabama. Like it's not the worst idea in the world. Like we joke about how bad Brian Ferentz was as an offensive coordinator. We joke about Nick Saban giving a lifeline to bad coach, to disgraced or embarrassed former coaches. Mm-hmm. And this is actually a kind of move that seems like it might actually make some sense.
Yeah, like Brian Ferentz gets a bad rap because he's such a, I don't want to call him a bad offensive coordinator. He's just not an offensive coordinator. And he was asked to coach a position that he's not really all that qualified to do. The move to Alabama would make a lot of sense. That line is very much underachieved. They still have the dudes there, obviously, because they're Alabama. And it lets Brian Ferentz go back to just doing what he's very good at, and that's coaching offensive line play, and Alabama can use him.
So there you go. That's one for you. So that was mine. Sorry. Do you have anything?
Oh, yeah. So going back to North Carolina, Georgia Tech, hilarious loss. I do feel a little bit bad that Carolina lost because Tez Walker took that, made that really nice catch, had him going to the 30-yard line or so, then took the big hit and got hurt, got taken to the hospital. I think he's out now and feeling better. But as funny as it is that they lost, hate seeing a team lose on an injury like that. But my favorite stat of the day / last 2 years, in the last 2 seasons, Notre Dame is outscoring Phil Jurkovic's teams 98-7 since Phil Jurkovic made his Instagram post saying Notre Dame appropriates Irish culture and mocks them. So just fun little nugget that Notre Dame is outscoring Phil Jurkovic. I don't even care how to pronounce his last name. 98-7.
Phil Jurkovic.
So glad he's caught on somewhere.
All right, you ready to turn the page to? God, I can't believe I'm saying this. Week 10. Slow down time.
It's sad. I don't want it to be week 10, but I'm also so happy that Maction's here. It's a real catch-22.
Oh, and we've got some awesome games this week. The Maction games probably aren't going to be awesome, but it's Maction, and we love it. And the weather everywhere is supposed to be kind of crappy. Not awful, but
got some snow here today.
Snow,
little bit, just little flurries, but we got a little snow here today.
Snow, wintry mix kind of stuff. The first one up, Northern Illinois at Central Michigan. Central Michigan's a 5.5-point home dog. That's an auto fire.
All right, Reed.
45.5 is the total. Buffalo at Toledo. Toledo a 15.5-point home favorite. 50.5 is the total. Ball State at Bowling Green. Bowling Green's a 5.5-point favorite. The total is 39.5. Kent State at Akron. Akron a 3.5-point favorite. 38.5 is the total. Matt, this is the stinkiest game of the year in college football. Kent State is the dirt worst team in college football. They have been the worst team in college football all season. They are dead last in Bill Connolly's SP+. Akron was actually surprisingly froggy, and then their quarterback DJ Irons got hurt. He's out for the season, and they are now the second worst team in the country according to ESPN Plus or SP Plus. So these are the 2 worst teams in college football going at it on a night where they're supposed to be wintry mix all day tomorrow in Akron. It's supposed to be done by game time, but it's supposed to be cold. Maybe the field conditions might not be great because of the wintry mix stuff. So that game's going to stink. But Matt has a Maction system. If you're new to the show, Matt, explain to the people the Maction system.
I'm not going to lie. That game terrifies me for the system. Not necessarily the underdog, but the over. The system's easy. It's underdogs and overs, except Ohio. If you bet Ohio, just not even looking. I think Toledo might actually become the new Ohio this year because I think they're Toledo just that much better than everybody else. So it might become underdogs and overs, except for Toledo and Ohio. You bet them. There's not much explanation to it. This was beginning of last season. Back when we were doing brown bag bets, I just decided every Tuesday and Wednesday on the show I was going to give out Maction picks, and that's what I did. And about halfway through, I just decided to blindly start betting underdogs and overs because that seemed to be hitting. And since that point, I think I finished that year 11-10 or 11-7. Last year was 28-16, so 39-23, I think is the math over the last year and a half. decently big sample size, so we're going to call that a system for right now. So that's our action system. We bet underdogs, we bet overs, except Ohio and maybe Toledo. We're going to figure that out. Might experiment with Toledo tonight and see if that works.
So Bill Connolly, his SP plus numbers have Toledo 18 points better than Buffalo. So 15.5, probably not super excited to have Buffalo there. But nevertheless, it's not out of the question. We move the page to Saturday. The best non-Saturday game. The best non-Saturday game this week is probably the USA versus Troy game, but I didn't write down the numbers there. This was just happenstance. That this is the first game on the list. Notre Dame at Clemson. Notre Dame's a 3-point favorite. 45.5 is the total there. In the Battle of Cox, we have Jacksonville State at South Carolina. We're going to find out once and for all which Cox are better. The Cox from South Carolina are 15.5 point favorite, a 54.5 point total. Texas A&M on the road at Ole Miss -3, 53.5 is the total there. Should I do my Lane Kiffin, my Galaxy Brain Lane Kiffin thing now, or should I wait till Thursday? Because I'm probably going to
wait till Phil. Phil loves Lane Kiffin stuff.
I'm going to probably bet Ole Miss -3. I think it's opened 4.5 and got bet down to 3, and I think that's a buy point for Ole Miss. Kansas State.
Sorry, are they home or on the road?
It's in Oxford, so it's a home game.
God, against A&M? Yeah, I might bet a lot of money on Ole
Miss. Kansas State at Texas. This was weird. It was 9 last week at DraftKings as a look ahead. Opened to 7, been bet down to 4.5. 51.5 is the total. This will be on the list of games we talk on Thursday. This is a nightmarish situation for Texas, even though it's a home game. Army at Air Force. Air Force 18.5 point favorite. The total 32.5. We just love Service Academy unders. Bedlam, the old running joke about Bedlam, and we'll talk about this game. We'll put this game on the list too for Thursday. The old running joke is that anything can happen in Bedlam. Oklahoma might win by a little. Oklahoma might win by a medium amount, or Oklahoma might win by a lot. But boy, it sure feels like, even though Oklahoma is a 6.5 point favorite and the total is 62.5, that Oklahoma State has got more than a puncher's chance there. Iowa at Northwestern. The total is now up to 30.5. It opened at 29.5 in some places. Are we going to get the inspired offensive performance from? I wonder, did the athletic director just see another embarrassing? Do you here you go? Do you think the over-under in Iowa games, and as much publicity as that gets week in and week out, on top of the fact that the eye test and the performance isn't good, but do you think the publicity week in and week out of how historically low these totals are matters to this athletic director?
I think everything probably matters in that. Like, I know they say no press is bad press, but like, that's not very good. And it can't help with recruiting. Like, I know bringing in defensive recruits, they're out, like Kirk Ferentz always been able to do that. He can always coach up the defense. Iowa's defense is legitimately very good. But if you're an offensive recruit and you're getting, pitched by Iowa and Kirk Ferentz, and you see, and Brian Ferentz, and you see their totals are 31.5 every week and they're going under, how is that going to put me in a position to go out and be an NFL wide receiver or running back? So yeah, I do think that would be a factor. And I think it's probably something you said, like, guys, we can't keep doing this.
So this one I put down because I hate this game so much, and I hate this, but I've talked about this. I talked about this a couple weeks ago. This might be a spot where you have to take the underdog. Florida State on the road at Pitt the week after after Pat Narduzzi threw his team under the bus and pissed all of his players off by what he said about after the game, how their players weren't very good. Pitt's a 21.5 point underdog. Total is 50.5. We've talked about Florida State kind of coasting at times this year. This one is one that I've kind of got circled, and I'm like, you might have to hold your nose in the Pat Narduzzi home dog spot there.
It is so bad, though. Like, that quarterback, I even forgot his last name. Like, with V, it's pronounced weird. He was so bad. Yeah. Value, I think. Well, yeah. He was terrible.
Not a great value at quarterback. We talked a little bit about Missouri, Georgia. We'll talk more about it on Thursday. We'll put that one on the list. Missouri at Georgia. Georgia, a 15.5 point home favorite. The total 55.5. Matt, did you know that there's a 5-way tie atop the Big 12 right now?
I did not know that, actually.
So it will be at most a 3-way tie because 4 of the tied teams are Texas, Kansas State, Oklahoma State. Matt, do you know who the other team in control of their destiny tied for the lead in the Big 12 is?
Name the 4 that you said. Oklahoma, Texas,
Oklahoma State,
Kansas State, Oklahoma State, Iowa State. I knew
Iowa
that.
State is tied for the lead after Matt Campbell tried to fight an Iowa State fan earlier this season. They control their own destiny.
Turning point. Matt Campbell trying to fight a fan, got the boys fired up.
However, they get a visit from the frisky Kansas Jayhawks on Saturday. Iowa State's a 2.5-point favorite at home. 53.5 is the total. LSU at Alabama.
Trap spot for Kansas. Coming off a big win.
Could be. LSU at Alabama. Alabama's a 3-point favorite. The total 60.5. LSU's going to be without 3 of their top cornerbacks, and Mekhi Wingo, one of their best defensive linemen, is going to be out for the year with an injury. So that's going to be an interesting one. We'll talk about more on Thursday. Washington on the road at USC. Washington's a 3.5-point favorite. Matt, I bet the total at 71.5 when it opened. It is now 75.5. So I'm going to be able to throw that one on the CLV bonfire when somehow that doesn't hit. However, the total in that game should be in the 80s, I think.
Yeah, it should.
I mean, I think it's going to end up there.
It should be safe. I mean, Washington played bad didn't play well last week. They still put up 42 against Stanford.
Right.
The Arizona State game, the offense was terrible, but it looked like Penix was hurting pretty bad in that game, and that was a weird game coming off a big emotional win. That sometimes those happen, and Arizona State's been frisky. USC's defense is terrible. Those teams are just that could be 55-50.
Now, that said, the one thing that concerns me is we might see just USC full on quit.
Season. That's fair. And Washington's defense is not awful.
Yeah.
We've talked about, they did a decent job against Oregon. They're not great, but they do have some dudes. And if UFC
puts a fighting chance.
If USC goes down 17-3 or 21-7 early, I could see a laydown moment.
I agree.
That's a fair point.
Oregon State at Colorado. Colorado, a 13.5-point road or home underdog. Total 62.5. Kind of interested in taking Colorado there. Oregon State's just not quite as good on the road. I don't want to talk. I was going to talk about Dion throwing his offensive line under the bus. I'm not going to do that. I've moved on with my life. I'm not getting.
We know what that. That's kind of who he is.
And then Pac-12 after dark, we go back down to the desert. UCLA at Arizona. UCLA is
that's going to be a fun football game.
Road favorite. UCLA is the total 52.5. Arizona, Jed Fish, his coaching against USC was one of those things where I was just like, God, I hate this guy. What is this guy doing? Undoubtedly has done one of the best jobs in America the last couple of years. That program was awful.
Yeah.
After the Kevin Sumlin years and everything since. Jed Fish comes in, hired under not the best process of hiring a coach, but he has done a really good job. They have a quarterback to build around in Noah Fifita, and they've got some good players on the outside. UCLA.
I feel like that's a hire where usually you can kind of see things coming with smaller schools like that, when somebody's going to be a good hire, when somebody looks like somebody that was just hired because they're a friend or basically doing somebody a favor. That's one that most people were pretty wrong on. Jed Fish has done fantastic. And if he coaches the USC game a little bit more aggressively, we're talking about an Arizona team that is currently a game out of the Pac-12 and in a position to go to a Pac-12 title game. So good for him.
I have to go make this. So that's all I've got. I'm going to go ahead and we're going to wrap this for the day because I have to go make a Photoshop, Matt. Josh Dobbs is now a Minnesota Viking.
I wanted to see if there was a spot for me to break that on the on the show that the Vikings. And I feel so bad for the Vikings because they're starting to play good football. Kirk Cousins is playing good football, tears his Achilles, and they go out and make the saddest quarterback trade of all time. We talk about sad field goals in college football. This is a sad quarterback trade. Oh, we got Josh Dobbs. We did something. So.
Yeah. Well, there's that.
Fun weekend in college football. I think it's Friday this week, though, with Phil, right?
Friday. We'll do Friday. Wife's going to be off. She'll go hang with the pup.
Card might be huge this week.
Ooh. I've already bet. I will be the guy. I will say this. I bet you're not supposed to bet teasers in college football, but I bet both Oklahoma State and Kansas State up to 13.
What's going on here? I don't like this. This happened yesterday, too, when I was doing the Bleacher Nation Bears show. I don't know what's going on. Yeah, that's where it's 3 times in a row. What? Why?
That's so weird. Oh.
I don't like this. What's going on? No? Okay.
And on that note, we'll wrap it. We'll be back on Friday. Phil's going to have some time. I'm going to be less frantic because my wife will be taking care of the puppy. who is hopefully sleeping, like I said. So we'll be back on Friday. We appreciate everyone for checking us out. We will talk to you guys later this week to preview an awesome Week 10 of the college football season. Talk to you then.